Welcome to the Zach Brown Show, the show that introduces you to old friends for the first time. I'm your host, Zach Brown. On this episode, I talk with Jim Carmack. We talk about going from the home shopping network to being on-air talent, missionary life in El Salvador, and a sandwich with legendary status. Our conversation right after this. Hey listener, if you've been enjoying the show and want to be a bigger part of what we're building here, I'd love to invite you to join the Patreon. It's a great way to support the podcast, and in return, you get access to some fun stuff like behind the scenes updates, bonus content, and even some one-of-a-kind swag like stickers, buttons, and a members only shirt. It helps us keep the lights on, the conversation flowing, and making this thing something special. So if you're in, come grab your spot. From the balcony to the VIP lounge, each tier brings you deeper into the world of the show. Just head to patreon.com and search for The Zach Brown Show. I'll see you on the inside. So as I've been going through these shows and looking back at the different people in my life that I just want to talk with or talk with again, the list I just keep narrowing down. And there's one name that just keeps coming back to me, and that is Jim Carmack. And those that have listened to the show for a while now will recognize Jim from episode 10, where he interviewed me on the show and has also done some fabulous voiceover work for the Carl's Arcade commercial. And so I just want to welcome back to the show my buddy, Jim Carmack.
Hey, Zach, I am honored to be here. I've enjoyed following along in all the conversations because a lot of the people that you talk to, I know already. So it's kind of fun hearing more to your story with their story and seeing how that fits. So it's cool. I feel almost kind of a little bit nervous to be on the highly touted Zach Brown Show because it's been years and you're kind of famous to me. So looking forward to it.
Well, I don't know about highly touted, but you might need to find yourself in some different circles.
You have shirts, man. You have shirts available for purchase. What more do you need? You
shameless plug.
Go buy yours today.
That's right. If you're like me, you probably wear clothes every day. So wear mine. Not my clothes, but clothes with my name on it.
Your clothes won't fit me.
So I want to go back to the beginning of your story to just kind of give some color and things. You grew up, correct me if I'm wrong, in Steeltown in Pittsburgh.
My family is from Pittsburgh, and I kind of claim that as my hometown. My mom and dad both were from there, grew up there. My grandparents lived there till they died. So I claim Pittsburgh as my roots and as my hometown. Officially, I was born in Parma, Ohio. We spent some time in Pittsburgh in that area when I was younger. And then we moved, my dad got a job near Cleveland, near Akron, Ohio. And so my middle high school years kind of growing up or actually in Northeast Ohio. And then I went to Ohio University. But as a Pittsburgh guy, I can't claim the Cleveland area. We're just too much of a rivalry going on there. So I'm diehard Pittsburgh to the core. And yes, there's a little more nuance to the whole story of where I grew up. But my formative years were kind of in Northeast Ohio in a town called Cuyahoga Falls. And so that's where the majority of my development came from. But I just call it Pittsburgh because it's easier to say all that.
I love it. The more people that I talk to from that area, it's interesting to hear about the whole Cleveland-Pittsburgh rivalry. And I never really knew that it was that big of a deal. But, we had Christine Boyle on the show, and there's a woman that I work with at church, and there's just different people where it's funny. It's like, oh, are you a Browns fan? Like, no, Steelers. So it's funny, just the very adamant, fan base.
It's so much different than where we have been around here in Florida because it's exactly that. Like if you're in Pittsburgh, 98.9, maybe more % of the city is in on the Pittsburgh, sports teams rooting. Like it's not a choice. I always make the joke, like my dad, gave me a choice. He said, you can be a Steelers fan or you can move out. And I was 8. So I said, oh, well, I'll just be a Steelers fan. So it's just part of the culture. And there is a huge rivalry. Cleveland and Pittsburgh are about 2 hours apart. And so, if you're from one or the other, you have to pick a team. And when you have 6 Super Bowls versus 0, it's kind of easy to pick. That's all I'm saying. So, but it is here in Pensacola, it's a whole mishmash of fans from all over and kind of depending on who's winning those seasons. There's a lot of, Kansas City Chiefs fans around now just because they're doing well. But, in Pittsburgh, you're a Pittsburgh fan unless you've come from somewhere else. And then it's really hard to to stand proud as like a Cowboys fan in the middle of downtown Pittsburgh on a Sunday, because you are in a sea of black and gold. So it's a really
Yeah.
big deal.
So something that I know about you that I want our people to know, because it's going to kind of lead into, I think, this next space
Uh-oh.
is you are a musician. You're a drummer. So where
Yeah.
did that come about in your life? What were some early inspirations or influences?
Yeah. When I started, my dad played piano and played guitar. And so when I was real young, we would sit and he'd play guitar and we kind of sing songs as a family. I was an only child growing up. So it was just us. But he would play and he got me involved, and he made me take piano lessons in elementary school. And, I would sit at the piano and cry trying to do the scales, because it just never clicked. Like, I just never really I understood it. I can explain music theory and how chord progressions work, and I get the notes and stuff. It just never fit in my mind. And then when I got to high school, or middle school, actually, they were asking us, "Hey, you want to join the band? Pick an instrument." And I'm like, "Drums look so cool," So I was like, "Let's try drums." And then like the rhythms hit. Like once I started learning what rhythms are, what 16th notes are, what rolls are, 5-stroke, 9-stroke, like I got it, and it kind of fit in my head. So I could speak rhythm to you. I just can't speak harmonies to you, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I love music. I love the sound of it and the way it does what it does. I'm so intrigued by the way it's put together. But drums just kind of fit for me. So I played all through middle and high school. I played the set. We've had a pep band and a concert band, and learned to do that kind of stuff, and timpanis and bells and chimes, things like that. But then when I got to college, my mom, it was literally as simple as my mom said, "You should go for marching band." I was like, okay. Like, had no other pre-thought about it. Why not give it a try? So I went down and auditioned for the marching band at Ohio University, which is a very prestigious marching band school. They're called the Marching 110, and they were fashioned after the Florida A&M University Marching 100. So there's a whole history to OU where they go back to this like show style band. So most of the bands in Northeast Ohio in that area are all core bands, and that you see kind of on the shows, and they walk and they do the script Ohio and stuff like that. Ohio U is a hard driving style that does dance breaks and has this whole kind of funky rhythm thing going on with it. So I just fell into it. I auditioned. I got selected to play bass drum, and so I marched bass drum in college and just had the best time ever, because it was a difference. It gave me a little bit of swagger, probably a little bit too much at times, but it was such a fun experience of performing and being up in those crowds. And some of my best stories, or maybe sermon illustrations, are still from that time. Like, our marching band got in a fight with the Miami of Ohio football team at homecoming show one year, just because they tried to get on the field too early, and things like that. We marched at one of the inaugurations for President Clinton in '92. And so like there's these cool moments that I have just from all the friendships and stuff I made through marching band. But unfortunately, I didn't really continue with that. So I like to think in my head I still got some chops that I could play, but I haven't. There's a lot of rust on these hinges right now, so I don't know how well I would do. But I love music. I love the process. I love being involved with it and being part of it, for sure.
Yeah. And I love how like drummers are so different from the rest of like a band. I
Yeah.
took one drum lesson and I quickly learned that it was not my spiritual gifting. The autonomy between hands and feet, and it didn't make sense. Like, I felt like Bambi on ice. It was just like, I can do these other things, but when it came to drums, I went, no. And I love, and you know this, when non-drummers try to tell the drummer what they want him to do, and watching the drummer look at you as if you're speaking some sort of like Star Wars language. You're like, I need you to give me that boom, boom, da ba, da ba. And he goes, what the heck are you talking about? And then, but when you listen to drummers do it, it sounds like they're doing the exact same thing that you're doing. Yet nobody knows what the other person is saying.
Yeah, it's just their own language, and that's how you relate it. It's how you relate it when you do offbeat stuff and backbeat kind of things. It just, what the sounds are supposed to make, and your brain translates that into hitting whatever you're supposed to hit, hopefully.
I'm always hyper aware of my lack of drumming ability when I am playing air drums to a song in the car next to my brother-in-law, who's an actual drummer. And when I watch that our hand motions look nothing alike, and I just look like a 2-year-old who's just shaking an invisible rattle, and he just looks over at me, and I go, I'll stop now.
Shaking a rattle is beautiful. That's so good.
I'm just over here, just like these, like I got some sort of maraca
You
situation
can play the
going on.
maracas, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a need. Auxiliary percussion is a need, not a priority, but it's a need.
There was a point when you got rid of your records and cassette collection, and you gave them to me in this very big, very heavy box. And one of the tapes is the like practice tape for your drumline marching band. I'm gonna have to dig that out and give that a listen.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the best things to do was we would call cadences, what we would do. And so we'd have these. So if you marched in marching band, that's just when the drums are all playing and the drum line's kind of marching. You're just keeping time for everybody to march, or you're not actually playing the songs yet. So the cadences would just flow. And Ohio U has these cadences that are historic. So the cool part is when, like, if you go back for a homecoming one year, they're still playing the same cadences. They may have added one or two new ones, but like you can jump back in and play these things. But they're so complex and they're so intricate and so fun. Like I had never really experienced that. I never really worked on a drum line to know like my part. So if I'm playing, we called them just A, B, C, D with the tonal bass drums that we carried. So if I'm playing C, like you got to know where your part is to play. And so you jump in with those and that offsets with the snares and what the tonals are doing. So it's this really cool conglomeration. But when you try to hear it and try to piece out your part, it's like, oh, that's really hard. I got to find my part. And so, yeah, practicing that is kind of fun. But it really made you develop teamwork. It made you trust the guys who are around you, because if you play your part perfectly, but the guy next to you doesn't, the whole show looks bad, which relates to a lot of other areas. But like you really rely on that person next to you to know their part. And there was a high expectation there. You showed up knowing your stuff. You showed up ready to play. And I remember the hours. I hope this doesn't get too far north, but it will. But the joke at the time, so when I marched, it was in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and the football team at the time at Ohio University was not extremely successful.
Okay.
And so, but the illustration I give is the band would go out to our marching practice field, and we would start our marching practices at like 4:00 in the afternoon. At about 5, the football team would walk past us to go to their practice field. And then at about 6:30, they'd walk back off the practice field and go inside. And we're still on our field practicing. So we would practice from like 4 to 7 every day on this practice field to be that good. And so we, the moniker is the most exciting band in the land. And we took that seriously because we showed up ready to go. And that was really cool. I know you didn't want to talk about marching band stuff, but I could go on for a while.
No, it's great. Again, this is something that we don't talk about all that often when we do get together. So I was like, I want to ask more about this.
Yeah.
So you find yourself, very much deep in the Midwest. You're in this. Oh, before I move on, I have a question to ask, and maybe you know where I'm going with this.
Okay.
There's an infamous sandwich. I want you to tell me about the sandwich.
The sandwich. Can I tell why you're asking this question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I give that? So,
because this is just you and me talking, and there's other people sitting and listening.
All right, I love it.
Two friends just catching up over coffee.
Yeah, years ago, I was asked to teach in a small group, like young adults, college age small group, and so I was doing this teaching, and so I was trying to think of a way that I could relate sharing what the gospel means. If you're trying to tell somebody about it, how good it is, and how exciting it is, and so I related that to telling someone about the sandwich, and I said, think about the best sandwich you've ever had. Think about the best sandwich. It's been perfectly made. It's only at one place you can get it. It's usually obscure or whatever, but like it's a thing, and you're going to tell somebody else about it. How would you describe that sandwich? How would you talk about that? How would you make that person feel about wanting to have that sandwich? And so like that's what the kingdom of God should be like. You should be wanting to share that kind of information with people who you care about, who you want to experience this sandwich or this kingdom that it means so much to you. And so I think I close that with stay sandwich minded. And so if you're going to be sandwich minded, you're going to tell somebody about the sandwich that has impacted your life. And that's the way that Jesus should be when you're sharing about the gospel. So the sandwich I had in mind that I'm thinking about is from this place called Primanti Brothers in Pittsburgh. The original ones, I think, in downtown, but there's a couple other locations now. But this sandwich in Pittsburgh, what they do is they take this fresh sliced Italian bread. It's super thick, and they layer it with whatever you want, usually deli meats and all kinds of different flavors on that. And then what they do is they put the cheese on top, and then they put coleslaw and French fries on top of the sandwich with some dressing or some flavoring. And then they put the top, and then they wrap it up and hand it to you. Now, what I found out is the reason for doing this was back in the day when truckers would come through. So Pittsburgh's a steel mining town. When these truckers would come through to pick up their haul, they would go by Permane Brothers, but they had difficulty kind of like having the fries separate and the coleslaw separate. So they just put it all in a sandwich, wrapped it up, and gave it to them so they could eat it while they were on the road. And that kind of started the trend. But this sandwich is about this tall. I mean, it's about 8 inches tall when you're done getting it. So it's hard to really eat it practically. But it's this cool experience of when you had it and when you talk about it, people know. And that's the cool part, is that if I say Permane Brothers and anybody who's listening has ever heard about it or been there, it's like, absolutely. And if you haven't, now you don't have to love it. Like, not everybody loves Permane Brothers, but it's the experience of going to this place and having this thing that's just so unique and so different, but that unites you. It unites people who've been there, like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So it's a deli sandwich with fries and coleslaw is what it is, but it's so good.
It was probably 10 years ago that you shared that story, if I'm doing the math right. And for 10 years, if somebody says this about like the sandwich or Pittsburgh, it's strange. I just start to salivate. Like, it's this Pavlovian experience that I think about Pittsburgh, and I just can picture the cold, and I just know this just dripping down your hands and whatever. And this is probably the best freaking sandwich that anybody's ever had.
We got to get you one. We got to go and get you one. Special trip. Can you expense it for the show?
Yeah.
It's so funny. I'm so funny. It's so funny you remember that. You've actually closed our text conversations with that. Stay sandwich minded. It's so funny. You're such a detail guy. I love it.
The Zach Brown Show continues after this. If you're like me, you probably wear clothes every day. You wake up and wonder, what am I going to wear today? The same old boring shirt as yesterday? No, thanks. But don't worry, I've got you covered. You can order your very own Zach Brown Show t-shirt today. Visit tpublic.com and search The Zach Brown Show. In addition to t-shirts, you can get other fun logo gear like mugs, hats, magnets, and more. Get your Zach Brown Show gear only on tpublic.com. All right, let's get back to the show. Okay, so now I want to move on. We talked about the sandwich. We can move on now from the Midwestern area. When did you make the shift from Midwestern marching band, bass drum life, moving south and finding yourself involved in television? How did that all come about?
So, well, my degree, my bachelor's degree is in communications, radio, TV production. Excuse me. So I'd actually studied that. I'd learned, television studio work and videography and editing and those kind of things. So after college, I moved back to Pittsburgh and really tried to find a job in television in Pittsburgh. But in that day, all the networks were union shops. And so trying to get into and get an interview anywhere was super difficult. And so I bounced around a little bit. I actually worked, I got hired to work security at Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. So I worked on the sidelines for the Steelers games and for like the Pirates games. And so I was able to kind of work security, had a blast doing it, but not a long-term career solution in my mind. So anyway, bounced around Pittsburgh for a while, trying to find some video work. And then my college roommate, who was also in the same major, had graduated and moved to South Florida. His dad lived in South Florida, in Ocala. And so he found a job at Home Shopping Network, which the headquarters was in St. Petersburg, Florida. And so he's like, hey, you should come down, hang out for a vacation. I said, yeah, sounds good. So I went down for a few days, hung out on the beach. He got me an interview at Home Shopping Network and interviewed with a guy. His manager liked me. He kind of offered me a job on the spot, and kind of went back and thought, nothing really going on here. As much as I love Pittsburgh and really wanted to stay, nothing going on in home. So I moved down to St. Pete and started working overnights on production at Home Shopping Network. And that was my introduction. It was a real professional organization. They had 3 round the clock networks running, all the time. And so you were always working either cameras or audio, and they had the latest graphics and all the stuff and the technical directing and things like that. So huge education for me there in the real world, and some fun. But the shift was brutal, just working overnights, because I'm working midnight to 8 a.m. It was just hard to get a functioning life going on at that time. But that's how I kind of got into TV. And then, well, do you want me to skip ahead and tell you how I got to Pensacola? Or
I want to park it at HSN for a minute. Okay. I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So growing up, my mom's mom, my Grammy, loved all those, like, it wasn't, what was the other one? It wasn't Home Shopping Network. It was
QVC.
QVC. She watched QVC like it was on all the time. I thought she only got like one channel. And I can remember them watching, and some of the products made no sense. Even as a little kid, I recognized this. And I remember there was one where there was a guy displaying a ladder, and the ladder collapsed and he fell, like, on live television. And as a kid, you're like, this is amazing. I'm like, I see why you watch this. During your time at Home Shopping Network, was there anything, I know this sounds like super cheesy, like, give me a theater story, but was there anything that happened while you were there that you were like, either was wild live on air, or a product that you went, nobody is going to buy this?
Nothing really wild on air that I remember. There may have been, I mean, things happened, but nothing like catastrophic or wild.
A collective awe over the listener audience.
Sorry, I'm trying to think. Like the weirdest things, like like the hosts would go. So the hosts are basically in a room by themselves, and their shows were 3 hours long. So the host would come in and kind of be ready to go, and they're talking about all these products that are coming up, and they've got a rundown. They're working with a producer in the booth, but they're talking. They're by themselves. They're literally just telling and talking. It's hard to do. It really is hard to do for 3 straight hours to just talk about a thing to yourself. No one's answering you. That's why they take so many calls, because they want to have conversations with people and talk about them. But sometimes, like, the hosts, they take a commercial break and they'd run to the restroom, and like sometimes they'd leave their mics on, and nothing weird or nothing off the wall, things like that. I'm trying to think of. I know I'm so disappointing. I'm sorry. Like,
no, it's fine.
Nothing really wild happened. It was just, so the one weird thing. So I'll give you this story. So the cameras that we ran would have these 2 joysticks. They were all robotic. So there's robotic cameras, and so that you could drive them around the studio. The studio is mapped out on the floor. Again, this is like mid 90s. So this is pretty good technology for the time.
Yeah, pretty sophisticated.
And so you could drive these cameras around. You had a computer screen in front of you, and you'd touch the buttons and call up a camera, and there's preset shots, and you'd zoom in on jewelry, or you'd work for a fashion, whatever. But you drive these things around. And so there's these 2 joysticks. And remember, I'm working overnight, so I'm working midnight to 8 a.m. and didn't get proper sleep and all the things. So we're typically running on a couple gallons of coffee during this time. But it's so cold in the control room. They kept it like 40 degrees. It's freezing in the control room. So I've got this big winter jacket on, all zipped up, and I'm all snuggly, and I've got both hands on the joysticks, and I'm like, I start to doze off. But rather than just like kind of nodding off and like, waking myself back up, I full out nod off and start to fall back in my chair. But my hands are on the joysticks. So I'm pulling back on the joysticks on these cameras, and all the cameras in the studio are just like start pointing straight up to the ceiling. And the director's yelling, hey, wake up. So I'm trying to recall the cameras again and back. So, I mean, just things like that, it was just, but it was live TV. It was just live, and whatever happened. And again, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a lot's going to happen. But I got to meet some cool people. Like Dick Clark was one of the guests that would come. Connie Stevens, I think, and Connie Selica was there too. So like not a lot of names that people know now, but back in the day, these are the ones that would bring in their items and promote them. So yeah, it was kind of cool, fun stuff like that, but nothing wild.
It's just their branded thing, like Dick Clark's fish fryer. Why are you selling this?
So he brought like cologne. He had his own cologne called Trademark.
That's funny.
I got some, and so I still have some just for the nostalgia of that. I've still got some of Dick Clark's Trademark cologne in my bathroom that I wear only on special occasions.
That's funny.
Yeah.
You can smell like the American Bandstand. The smell of Philadelphia.
The smell, the smell of young dancing. No,
That's
it was it was good.
And one other really cool thing happened, obviously, when you were at Home Shopping Network.
It did. I met the young lady who would eventually become my wife, and so grateful for that little unplanned detour in my world. But yeah, I didn't know. So she was also working at Home Shopping Network. We ended up working on kind of the same schedule, and so just started hanging out, becoming friends, and really liked hanging out together. And found out that she was from Pensacola. We both got tired of working overnights and being exhausted and all the things. So we kind of just left. We left together and started working our way back up here to Pensacola, where she's from, and and here we are. That's how we ended up in this nice town.
There we go. There's our segue. So with Tracy, you move up to Pensacola, and when did you get to WER? Was that an immediate thing, or what was the transition time there?
No, so we came into Pensacola. I didn't have a job, and she found one. She had some connections in retail from when she was growing up, so she was working, and so I was trying to find a job again. So Pensacola is a strange television market in that technically it's Mobile, Pensacola. So Mobile, Alabama, and Pensacola, Florida, are in the same television market. So as you know, the three of the four television networks live in Mobile, Alabama, and WEAR is the only one in Pensacola. And so I was trying to get in with his television station here in Pensacola. And so I kept knocking on the door and kept sending emails and kept doing these things and trying to interview. And so I literally just kept banging on the door. And at the time, Tracy's brother has a landscaping company. So he was kind enough to let me help him and work to kind of make some money. It is not my spiritual gift to work in the yard. My short story is that I was trying to work in an area, and we were by a fence, or a wooden fence, or I put my hand up on the fence to try and get down and do something. And as I stood up, my hand is burning, and I've got fire ants just all over my hand, just eating me alive. Apparently, I find out at that point I'm allergic to fire ants because we didn't really deal with them in the Pittsburgh area, Northeast Ohio. So I've got my hand on fire, burning up. I'm like, this is not for me. I really got to get a job indoors with some air conditioning because this is not going to work out. But basically, I kept on knocking. And if one of the kind, sweet, amazing lady who worked the front desk at Channel 3, her name was Brenda. Yeah. And she would still tell you the story because when I showed up for my first interview, I brought donuts because I kind of made the joke when I was either calling. I set up with an interview with our promotion director, Kathy Dunnigan, and she said, "We'll come in tomorrow at 10." I said, "Sounds good. I'll bring donuts." And so I did. And so Brenda always remembered me bringing donuts. She said, "You're the only one that ever brought donuts to an interview." And I never forgot that. So but I basically kept knocking on the door until they let me in. I just wasn't going to quit.
I love that Brenda and Kathy they built the building around them, I'm pretty sure. But
Brenda was
the sweetest lady,
kindest person, and to work that front desk because she was the first line of defense. She was our security sentinel. Yeah, and she was amazing. I never ever heard her say a cross word or an unkind word about anybody, not once. Even when she was having a difficult day or things were tough, she never once had a frown on her face. So kind.
Every time you walk past Brenda in the hallway, it was just such a warm presence, a bright smile, and just greet you by your name. And I know that's something simple. People are like, duh, but like when you pass somebody on the street and just say, hey, or kind of the nod, but does someone recognize and actually know your name? And there's just a personal connection to that. And yeah, when I showed up, Brenda was the one that let me in the door, and just that very kind and welcoming, just what a great lady.
Yeah, she's incredible.
So you bring in donuts, and you didn't start on screen though.
No, I was started in promotion. So the opening for me was at the time WEAR was acquiring a station in Fort Walton Beach called WFGX, and at the time you couldn't legally own both. It was called a license management agreement. Details no one cares about, but letting you know. And so they were going to manage the station in Fort Walton Beach. And so they had a need for some other staff. So I didn't get hired originally at WEAR, but Kathy, the promotion manager, had a spot available for me at WFGX. So when I came in, I kind of worked there behind the scenes. So promotion was in charge of making the station look good. So we would we'd be involved in parades and in festivals in the town, and getting our name out there and throwing frisbees at people, and passing out fun swag that you could give, just had our names on it and stuff like that. So I was traveling down to Fort Walton Beach for a while, working down at that station, and then eventually our department readjusted a little bit, and I got a position and still in promotion here in Pensacola. And so did that for many years, worked in commercial production for a little while, actually ended up leaving. Short version there, we kind of, after our son Trevor was born, we kind of took a little hiatus, moved down to South Florida for a bit, and had some other opportunities down in Venice, over in Coral Springs, and then ended up coming back to Pensacola, still in promotion. But that was kind of my behind the scenes. And I worked cameras, I worked editing, I worked writing,
Mhm.
working on traffic logs, things like that. That was a majority of my career there for about the first 10 years at Channel 3. And then, you want me go ahead.
Yeah. So what was the jump? Like what?
Mhm,
Because that is a that is like its own little city in all that,
mhm,
like the sales and the like that whole side of the studio, or not studio, rather the building is the station is wild.
mhm.
It's like two different, worlds coexisting, and
Yeah.
so, but what was the leap that took you from being behind the camera to in front of the camera?
Yeah. So I was a bit of a character. I was could be loud at times and make myself known. But I developed a relationship with our news director
Hmm.
at the time. Peter Newman was his name, and we got along pretty well. And you're right, there was a wall between news and everyone else. But I hung out there enough and made enough friends where I was pretty well known, I guess. And I kept teasing him like, you need to put me on air. You need to let me do this. You need to let me sit in and those kind of things. And so one year, typically, we had an agreement with the Pensacola Interstate Fair. So the fairgrounds is kind of right down the road. The fair is a big deal every year here. It goes for about 10 days in the fall. And our meteorologists would typically go and do live shots from the fair. That was kind of a normal thing they would do.
Yeah.
Well, this one year, our chief meteorologist, Ashley, was very pregnant at the time. And so they didn't want to have her out of the building and kind of out, in the outdoors and unpredictability of a fairground. So they thought she should probably stay closer to home and stay in the building. And so our news director said, "Hey, you want to go do these live shots? You can go and do whatever you want at the fairgrounds. Have fun." I said, "Absolutely." So I kind of started doing the fair, and the first year went so well. I was so goofy and so silly and just trying everything. And I rode a mechanical bull, and I would go down the slides, and I would do whatever was out there just to make it fun. I'd eat funnel cakes and make a mess. I just was goofy with it.
Yeah.
And so eventually the next year it came up again. They said, "You want to do the fair again?" Yeah, absolutely. So I became the fair guy. That my mom used to call me, "You're the fair guy," like just
That's
doing
funny.
this thing. So every year I would get that opportunity to go and do the shots at the fair. And that's kind of how it grew. They gave me a chance, an opening came up during the midday show called Dayside. They say, "Can you fill in and do this little spot or whatever?" Yeah. "Hey, can you do weather for this?" Yeah. So I kind of started training on weather and just look for opportunities. I did sports on the morning show. My morning show guys, Jared Willits and Christian Garman, they would every year after the Super Bowl, they let me come in and kind of do our own little Super Bowl commercials, the best of the best kind of thing. And
That's
so
fun.
they let me sit in. And so then Jared would call me the 3 a.m. special correspondent. And so he would let me do some live shots there. We had a segment called Toast and Jam where they would invite bands to play live on the morning show. So it's 5:30 in the
Nice.
morning and we're downtown Pensacola and just blasting out. And so we had all these different local bands coming on, and I was introing them and interviewing those guys. So those opportunities just kind of kept growing. They gave me
Yeah.
more and more chances to be on the air, and that eventually opened up into an opportunity to do the weekend weather. The meteorologist took a step back, and so I started doing weekend weather. And uh, at the time, Mississippi State had a program where you could get your certification, your broadcast certification online. And
Mhm.
so I did that. When we started, you'd sign up and they would send you a case of VHS tapes. And these were lectures. So this was your first online school before it was really a big deal.
Wow.
And so you'd watch these tapes, you take a quiz, you'd send it all back, and they'd send you the next set for the next set of classes. And so that's how I started. And I got certified broadcast meteorology, and then kept doing weekends for a while. And that was it. That's it. And then I was on air, and then it was a full-time gig. So.
I didn't know that it started at the fair. And that's so funny because,
Mhm.
you and I, our conversations that we'd have about different pieces where they'd be really hard hitting news, or the ones that were like, this is just the most fluff puff piece. That's just
Yeah.
why, but
Yeah.
you got to break up the negative. But I
Yeah.
love it. You starts out with, fun slides and funnel cakes and just
I
being
had a
the field
blast.
correspondent.
And I still remember some of those. I don't remember all of them, but I remember a lot of them. And just, just I just try to make it fun. Like we said, it was just an opportunity, but why not? Why not go for it?
Yeah.
I got to interview some cool bands in my mind that were cool. Like Firehouse came through, and I was a big
Nice.
fan. I had met them at an event up in Northeast Ohio, so I was talking to them about that. I got to interview the Oak Ridge Boys came through and gave me a hard time on air. So just those kind of memories that were just fun, that aren't that impactful to a lot of other people, but to me, they were kind of cool moments and things. Dick Cavett, the great TV
Yep.
host, said I did a good interview. And I
Hey,
said, "Oh," he said, "That's pretty impressive, huh?" I said, "Yeah, from you it is. That's so cool, you know." So
that's
those kind
pretty
of things
great.
are fun. Those are fun stories that I'll always tuck away and share.
Yeah. I don't know why. For some reason, the Oak Ridge Boys always come up in my life. Like my grandmother went to high school with
What?
Joey Bonzel, and so
Uh-huh.
like knew him. And like when they were kids, like he sang at their wedding, like that. Just because, again, they were like high school friends. I don't know why the Oak Ridge Boys always pop up in my life in stories.
Well,
Uh,
and the story there is we were waiting for the live shot, and they're used to doing interviews. They've been around forever, and so they're waiting. And said, "Hey, tell me when we're live, so we don't say anything inappropriate." And so they're all in the back shouting these nothing off the wall, but just
right.
verge inappropriate comments that they're making in the background, waiting. But then they cut to the live shot, and if you watch TV, you know when the reporter's standing there nodding, it's like, "Yes, you're on the air," and
Yeah.
they're asking you a question, and you're waiting to respond. So I'm nodding my head like, "We're on, guys," but I can't say that. And they're all like, and they're whispering, and I'm hearing these comments that, again, nothing bad, but just not that I could
A
say
little
on
off
air kind
color.
of thing. Yeah, a little off color. And I'm like, okay, and yes, we are live. And as a matter of fact, I'm with the Oak Ridge Boys right now, who are giving me a hard time. That was kind of fun.
That's great. So I can remember, coming into Channel 3. This is where I'm going to kind of merge our stories. And this was after the first season of the Wahoos. And again, this will be a little redundant for those that have heard our first episode together. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, for those of you hearing this for the first time, welcome. For those of you hearing it a second
Glad you're
time,
here.
here's a refresher.
Where you been?
Yeah. And so, short version was got a job there at the station because one of the directors at the ballpark was a manager of the production team. And so on weekends, you would you and I usually like connect over weekends because you were the weekend meteorologist at the time.
Right.
And yeah, you did, reporting and stuff like that, but that was mainly where I knew you. And I wore this shirt intentionally today. I've got a Hysteria shirt because I remember the very first connection was, I think it was a Sunday night, and I was running camera. That was my shift. Sunday nights was camera in the studio, and it was you and Will Kennedy, who was the weekend anchor extraordinaire. And the greatest thing was that the studio environment that the two of you created in comparison to everybody else was it, like where the regular news was all business, was very serious, and they were all great. They're all just about the news. Where on the
Right.
weekend, it was like a frat party sans beer. It was just like you'd come in and it was not out of the ordinary for the Beastie Boys to be blasting or Motley Crue to be blasting with 5 seconds to go live. And it's just this party, like, let's get hyped up and get psyched for our own sanity, if nothing else. And you and Will were kind of tossing back and forth lyrics to, it was either Rocket or Run Riot, one of the two. And I finished the next line, and I can tell you exactly where I was standing in the studio. And you turned and looked over me, and you were like, "You know Def Leppard?" I was like, "Yeah, man." You said something along the lines of like, "Okay, we're gonna get along just fine." And it was this moment where I was like, "Okay, I'm in. I've at least got
You
these
made it.
weekend guys. Like, this is gonna be good." And it was fun because, unfortunately, the nature of most news is negative, as they say. And Kendall said this when he was on the show, if it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just just blech that you watch, and when it happens, it's like terrible. And so the environment that you guys did your best to create and sustain in the studio, but also I think for all of us on like the production crew, it was just fun. It was like, let's try to have a little bit of joy in the midst of the nonsense and the chaos. And the greatest thing in the world that I don't really know who developed it or how we came about, what was the thing that started, but was whenever Will Kennedy would cover for Steve Nissom on sports and we would play secret sports words.
Yes.
And it was so, unless I can't remember if we've talked about this before, but anyway, just as if we haven't, the whole shtick was that in the commercial or the show block before sports would happen, I believe sports was D block if I remember correctly. And during that section, we would be talking to each other over the headset and just shouting out random things like mollusk, Kentucky Fried Chicken, lobster bisque, Shaka Khan, like whatever it was, you just Velociraptor. And we'd write them down on a piece of paper, and about 30 seconds before we go to live, we had dropped the list of words in front of Will, and he would have to work them in to sports. And there were a couple times that you did it as well. I remember one time he called you and you both did it together, which is insanity. We pulled out we'd rotated the desk or whatever, such a thing. And I mean, I don't know if they do this on like Good Morning America or whatever, but I just think about the kind of Guardians of the Galaxy style atmosphere that we had in that studio. What are some of your like memories and thoughts of those weekends?
Yeah, the cool thing, you mentioned Will. Will is so talented. He's so witty.
Yeah.
And so genuinely funny. But at the same time, he is. And there was a seriousness to the news. You're reporting serious things. And that was usually, like you said, the A block at the beginning. And so he had a professionalism about him. He never once slacked off. It wasn't like he was just a total goofball, but he was so quick that he could make that transition or say these things. And so some of the best memories I have is we would do what's called a toss to weather. So he'd finish up the B block story, and then he'd be standing next to the weather desk, and he'd turn and look at me. And so the joke was, so weather, but he never did that. He would always throw me such a curveball that I'd have to try and be on my feet, and I would get nervous just trying to think about how I'm going to respond to whatever he's going to say, because I know it's coming literally from left field. Keep the baseball analogy going, but like. It was such a fun time because he was so relaxed and so genuinely funny that you just had to laugh. Yeah. And so I remember being comfortable with him, if that makes sense. Like, comfortable is the way I would describe it. We didn't not take it seriously. We didn't, phone it in, but we were relaxed and comfortable with each other. And like you said, you made that atmosphere where we were all, and there's a genuineness to you being a part of our conversation. It wasn't like, oh, don't talk to the anchors. We're over here being, our witty, amazing selves, and you just be quiet. There was just this atmosphere, and Stephen McCaskill, another guy who just same idea. We all just kind of throw in these jokes or these things, and everybody's in on the part of it. Yeah. But it was just like, and you had to. I mean, my weekend schedule was basically 4 a.m. Saturday is when I'd start, and I'd go until the 10:30, 10 o'clock show that night, get home at 11, come back at 4 on a Sunday. So I'm wiped out and tired anyway. Yeah. And then we're going until Sunday night at 11 again. So you just had to have this kind of like release a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, the quotes were funny because Will would always work them in so seamlessly. Yeah, like I would try and shove them in, like, trying to make it fit into make the extra socks fit into the drawer when there's too many. I'd try and cram it in and just say a random word. But he would work it in so beautifully and almost artfully that it was just, you had to just step back and say, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
The two that have stuck in my head after all these years are, there was one, and it was a golf. It was covering golf, and the guy like hit it and basically sliced it. And he was like, he swung the golf club, and Will did it, and he goes, and he made a Chewbacca sound, and it was just threw it in there, and it was so random, but it was so funny. But my absolute favorite one was he was covering hockey, and he's just breakneck speed covering these things, and he was just like 1, 2, 3 hat trick for the Ice Flyers, lobster bisque for everybody, and he just moved on. Like, didn't give you 2 seconds to register this just asinine insert, and it was just so great.
Yeah.
Do you remember the night when he decided that he was going to cover at least one play of every single sport that was played that day?
Yeah. It was literally just 5-second clips of like every single thing. He's like, and then the winner was like, he just literally covered every single thing.
Like at one point, it was like, I think he was covering badminton. It was like, why? Is it because it's out there and I've got to include it?
Because I've got it. And I think sports usually got cut. So they usually start with like 3 or 4 minutes to fill. And by the time we get to them, because we've talked or things have gone long, they usually had like 2. So it's already short. So he's just bouncing through them all. Will is so funny. And I think he's a professor now. He teaches at the UWF. Like he's instructing the next generation of people how to do that. But he's so down to earth, so practical. Yeah.
He's a Renaissance man. Just all the stuff in the lives he's lived. Will Kenny's one of those people. When you're around him, you're like, I'm in the presence of greatness.
Yeah, he is. And he felt like that. You felt like I could never keep up with him. I would try and say a joke or try and get a zinger in on him. And I just knew it was worthless because it was coming back with 10 other things before I could think of anything. So
Yeah.
he's so funny.
And there came to be a season, obviously, when it was kind of winding down for all of our times, where it just felt like, the news was negative, the, political climate that was at the station, it was just not fun. Like, things were shifting, leadership was changing, and it was kind of rough. And, I think at that point, it was very much like, it was like war. Like, we were all in this together and doing what we could. It was like MASH, you know what I mean? Like, they're all in this crazy thing and they're just doing things for everybody else's enjoyment or entertainment. And we all definitely rubbed each other the wrong way at different times, whatever. But I just think about just the silliness. And I think that's where Secret Sports Words was born out of. But I can remember, literally sitting on the set, like just out of camera shot, and like with my headset on, and just throw my hand up like 5 seconds, you're on, and just be like literally like you're on live TV and I'm sitting playing on my phone, like at your feet, just because like, all right, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna rotate the desk. We're gonna change the shot. All right, moving on, just
Yeah. It was just that atmosphere. And it was nice. It was nice to be weekends. It was tough being weekends because it was the hours and you want to be off, but it was just such a laid back and different style and different place to be at the time. So I'm grateful for those years. People ask me often, do you miss being on Channel 3? And I really don't. I don't miss the news side of it or necessarily the weather side of it. I miss the people. And that's my answer. I miss the genuine people.
Yeah.
I think we got along really with everybody. I mean, there may have been, like you said, one or two we kind of rubbed the wrong way or just didn't really jive with. But for the most part, everyone on those newscasts and in that newsroom was a genuine friend that I could say, or that we at least got along with. And so I miss those friendships more than anything else.
It's almost like when you go on vacation with somebody, I feel like you really grow closer to them and you have these like kind of keystone memories. At my time, you were there obviously way longer than I was, but my time there was, a major election. There was, a hurricane that wiped out like a third of our town. I mean, that was, I don't remember which hurricane that was, but the 3 Mile Bridge collapsed and, like Scenic Highway was washed away. And, I remember you were doing very serious coverage out in the field for that. We had the big freeze or whatever it was. And it was, people were working like 12-hour shifts because they couldn't leave the station or we couldn't get there because, people's homes were, surrounded by water. And it was one of those things where, when you're in those moments, it really brings people together. And, like tensions are high and emotions are raw and whatever, but it's just like, you get those little breaks in between and you just start cracking up about something, or you'd have super deep conversations. And, I think another thing that we did that was super silly, and I think about different times, was you mentioned Steve McCaskill. You and he had bonded over Penguins hockey.
Yeah.
And you guys brought me into it and we started watching and we were collecting Pens points.
Yes.
And they would send us these little cards every 15 or 20, whatever it was. And we could get like free root beer or like Crush, whatever it was. Their product at like a Circle K gas station, which is fortunately right next to the station. And then I remember we built so many up that we were all able to get like free t-shirts. But the only thing was that you had to redeem it in person. You couldn't like send away for it. And so we're like, crap, what do we do? And you're like, wait, I've got my buddy Johnny Carr or whatever. And you're like, we're going to mail him all these cards.
We mailed him all the stuff and get them. Yeah.
And so I just remember one night at the station, like there's just this box, like just stuffed full of merch from the Penguins like team store.
Yeah, the funny part was I think the Penguins took a bath on that promotion because what they were doing was they would say a keyword or a code word during the broadcast. So you're listening to the radio broadcast of a Penguins game and they would say, icing is today's keyword. Put it in for your Pens points. And so we do that, but like I don't think they realized at the time that people were getting these code words and then they were just posting it. So everybody who would just follow these message boards, again, it's kind of before the prevalence of the internet, but they'd follow these message boards like, oh, keyword is icing. Great. So they're all putting in these points.
Yeah.
And so everybody's getting shirts, everybody's getting hats, like everybody had something. And they had to, they had to make good because they had put this out there. You agreed to this and they did it. They haven't done that since. They haven't had the same promotion. I still have that shirt. It's funny you said that because I still have that shirt. I came across it the other day.
It's a good day to play hockey.
Was wearing it. It's a good day to play hockey. It's a good day for hockey. Mike Langism. Yeah.
I don't know what happened to mine, but I was like, man, it was such a good shirt. We all had them. It was like this inner club within the club that it was, within our weekend nonsense, there was still this, like, the people who were watching the Penguins. I joked because I said there was one season that I could tell you the entire lineup of the Penguins. And I was
you
like, I
don't
don't
really
know
like
why.
hockey.
No, I do enjoy hockey, but
Yeah,
I couldn't care less about this
right.
team. But suddenly it was like, oh, I'm pulling for these guys because I'm getting Mountain Dew and T-shirts.
Well, and even that, like we were watching, so I started asking, hey, if this is available, can we pull this up kind of on satellite? That's how we started watching. So if the Penguins game was available, because remember back in the day, this was not like the internet where you just dial up whatever.
Right.
It had to be broadcast, and we don't get any Pittsburgh stuff down here. But on our satellite dishes at the station, you could kind of dial some stuff up if it wasn't being used. So I would ask the engineers to pull up the Penguins game, so we'd watch these on Saturday nights or whatever. And that's how, and I started kind of explaining hockey to Steve and to you and all the guys. And so it's like, we started watching these games. It's funny, even that, this is however many, 10 years later or whatever, McCaskill and I still text during Penguins games or during the season. Like, what do you think of this? Or we saw there's a trade, or let's go Pens. Like, we still kind of watch games together, even though he's not even in town anymore. So it's just, those are the kind of bonds you talk about. When I talk about missing my friends, like, it's those moments, those memories of you being far away, of him being far away, but we're still connected because we've had that shared experience and always will.
Yeah. Our conversation continues after this.
Hi, having a great time?
Looking for the perfect place to unwind after a long day? Welcome to the Brass Mallard, your neighborhood escape for great food, craft brews, and unforgettable vibes. At the Brass Mallard, we're all about the unexpected. No sports on the TV, just great conversation, delicious food, and an atmosphere that feels like home. From barbecue chicken and perfectly grilled steaks to our famous house-made rosemary bread, every bite is packed with flavor. Oh, and did we mention? We serve schnapps. Why? Honestly, we're not sure, but it's here, it's tasty, and we're all about it. Located at the corner of Laverne and Grady, we're right where your good times begin. Gather your friends, pull up a chair, and hear stories you've definitely heard before. The Brass Mallard, where flavor takes flight. All right, let's get back to the show. So you're at, Channel 3, and we've already, talked about that you are also kind of teaching, like Sunday school, for lack of a better term, and kind of leading college group at Hillcrest and things like that. Mm-hmm. When was the next, shift in life where you really started getting into ministry and then eventually like missions work?
And I hope I'll be tight enough with the story because it's so involved. But I grew up in church, got away from church, is the short version of kind of my history, my testimony. But once our son Trevor was born, I knew I had a responsibility. Now I've got a life that's not just mine. And I should have had that idea with my wife, of course, but like now it's like we've created a new thing, and I've got a responsibility to him to teach him truths about this world. Mm-hmm. And so we start looking for a church. We find this church, and we're involved. So we jumped in. We're teaching like kids stuff, and then he comes into middle school and he wants to go to camp, and so I end up going to camp with him and love it. Like I'm having just the best time at a student, camp, church camp, and having so much fun and learning so much stuff. And so I guess I'm kind of relearning, if that's the right way to say it, about the scripture and the Bible and my relationship with God. I mean, I had not developed a strong adult relationship with the Lord. And that was something that I started to really grow. And so the way I say it was my desire to be on air at Channel 3 was more about me being seen and me being invited to the places and me being recognized and kind of having this, hey, look at me. Mm-hmm. But as I'm going through my almost 10-year career on air, I'm also growing and learning in the Lord and developing that spiritual relationship and realizing my need to be in a walk with the Lord, a consistent Bible reading, prayerful walk with the Lord, not just for me, but for my family. And so I'm growing as a Christian. And as the time I'm being more and more recognized on air, I want it less and less, if that makes sense. Like I'm realizing it's not about me. Like I wanted it to be about me. And now that it is about me, I don't want it to be about me. So I'm having this kind of internal conflict about being recognized for being on air, but also knowing that I want to serve the Lord. I really want to give to the Lord. And so I went on to a church camp one year, and I was teaching a small group at the camp. And so we're just having, going through these little lessons and talking about what the speaker talked about. And at the end, we're doing this little question and answer time. And I remember, you guys have any questions for me? And one of the young ladies was from our church, and she said, "So you're a meteorologist?" I was like, "Yeah." And she said, "No, I'm sorry." A young lady from a different church was there, and she said, "You're on air." She said, "I feel like I want to go into meteorology. Could you tell me about that?" So I started explaining, yes, it's really cool. We need Christians in the industry. We need people who can share, this and be good at their job. So if you feel called to meteorology, please pursue that in college. It's great. And then the young lady from our church who kind of knew a little bit about me, she said, "You don't seem very happy, like when you told that story." She's like, do you like what you do?" And I just had this break. I'm like, the tears just welled up. I was like, no, which is terrible because I just told this other young teenager, "You should go and do this thing. It's awesome." And I'm like, no, I'm not supposed to. I just had this knowing this is not where I'm supposed to be. And I just remember being broken in that moment. That was like a pivotal moment where I was like, I'm not doing what I'm called to do. And so again, there's a lot more to that. I kind of prayed through that and really worked through that. But I came back from that camp experience, sat down with our pastor. I'm like, I feel like I'm called to this thing. I don't know what to do next. And so he encouraged me to do some seminary classes and so just to kind of pursue this and kind of figure out what's next. And so that really started the spot within me of like, I could be doing more. And I hadn't really wanted to walk away from TV because I have 20 years of experience there. And I have, all this time build up and insurance and benefits and all these things. But I knew there was something. And I remember when it got to the point, I had talked through with my wife, Tracy, for, a while on this. And she's, of course, encouraging me and we're praying about it and we're doing the right things. But I was afraid to make that move. And I remember, and it was Easter. We had done the late broadcast. And I just called her. I said, I can't. She goes, then you need to go. You need to go. And she said, we'll figure it out. We'll do whatever it works out to be. We'll make it. We'll make it. And I don't have the answers. I didn't have a job. I don't recommend this. I'm not saying this is the way to do any of this. Don't quit a job if you don't have another job. It's bad advice. But I just knew I couldn't be there anymore. I had just been miserable going in and knowing this is not where I'm supposed to be. Yeah. And so anyway, that was the step away. I resigned from Channel 3 and had no idea what was next. And so skip ahead a week or two, and a guy from First Baptist Church in Pensacola had asked me to come and speak at their luncheon. He called it the Leisure Timers. So this was people who had been retired in their group. And so he asked me to... Oh my
gosh, I'm forgetting about this. But now that you're saying this, I forgot about this whole season.
This is pivotal.
We've been through a lot of life together, Jim.
I know. I hope I'm not boring. I know there's a lot, but it's just a lot to tell.
There's going to be one person that's hearing this that goes, "This is exactly what I needed to hear." So you tell your story, Jim.
I hope I am.
If they don't like it, there's the fast forward button.
If God is calling you, I want to encourage you, whoever you are. So I did. I stepped away, have no job, don't know what I'm doing next. And so this guy from the Leisure Timers downtown, and he had asked me to come and speak and talk about weather. I mean, as a meteorologist, he scheduled me like a year before this happened. Like he's on the ball. Yeah. And so he calls me, he said, "Hey, are you still good for next Thursday?" I'm like, yeah. I said, "But I need to tell you, I resigned. I'm not with Channel 3 anymore." He said, "We don't care. You still know about weather. We just want you to come tell us about weather." It was kind of like a hurricane prep, get yourselves ready for the weather season, the hurricane season. Okay. Yeah. I'll still
turn
come
around,
talk.
don't drown.
Literally, like, yeah, make sure you board up your windows. And, so I go down at this luncheon and I give my 45-minute spiel on weather and how to prepare yourself and what a watch means and what a warning means and, how to know what weather terminology is. And they're asking questions and they're, they're following up on weather and all this kind of stuff. And it was fine. It was great. But at one point, because I'd mentioned, I said, and did full disclosure, I'm no longer with Channel 3. I've resigned. And someone asked me about that. "Why aren't you with Channel 3? I said, "Honestly, I feel like I'm being called into ministry. I don't know what that looks like or how that plays out, but that's what I feel like God is telling me." And so I wrapped up that luncheon, more weather talk, and went home, and no big deal. I get a call the next day from the pastor at First Baptist Church. His name was Barry Howard at the time. And he called me. He said, "Hey, do you want to have lunch?" I said, "Sure." So we meet, and he said, "Tell me your story." So I kind of told him about what was going on. He said, "Well, let me give you my view of what happened." He said, "So I had just gone to the airport to drop off a colleague, and I was coming back to the church and on my way through the building and just poked my head in the door to the Leisure Timers luncheon to see how it was going. I see you up there speaking, and I hear you say, I feel like I'm being called into ministry. I don't know what that means. And so he said, I didn't really think much about it, but I went back to my office, and we had just found out that our missions pastor is leaving, going to another church in Texas. He'd been called to lead this church in Texas. So we have a spot available. And I keep a folder file in my desk drawer of resumes that I've been given over the years. And so I opened up my folder to look and start looking through resumes. And he said, your name is on a sticky note on the inside flap of this folder. And he said, I don't know when it got there, who put it there, who gave it to me. He said, but your name's there. I feel like we need to talk about what's going on with you. And he said, so we don't want to shut down what the Lord is doing. So that's the short version of the conversation. I'm still kind of floored by this, but basically he said, why don't you come on with us almost as like an intern? Now, remember, I'm an adult. Like, I'm not a college guy coming out looking for my thing. He said, well, why don't you come on? He said, we can pay you a little bit, maybe help you in this time, but I'll open up the door and let you see behind the curtain, if you will, and let you see what pastoral ministry looks like. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of determine if this is what you're really called to do or if this is not it. And I said, that would be such a blessing. And so it just really struck me, A, that he was willing to do that. And B, that the God had kind of worked those things together, even though I could not have planned those moments. So he brought me on as a pastoral intern. He let me preach. He let me teach. He let me do funerals and see the plannings of stuff. We were at the bedside of people who were dying, and we were doing hospital visits, and we were doing all the stuff. In fact, I have it in my calendar every year. 10 years on this day is when I started, or this day is when I started at First Baptist. So it was 10 years ago, just this month. And I text Barry every year saying, I am so grateful that you took a chance and gave me that opportunity when you could have gone to hire the next guy or done the next thing. You gave me an opportunity that I so desperately needed, and I'm so grateful for. And that just encouraged what I felt like I was called to do, that this is what God has been putting before me. And it just took me a long time to realize that we had wrestled and we had struggled. And I felt like God had said, I had this for you a while ago. You just weren't really willing to take the step. But he did. And once they did that, he opened the doors. So that was my time at First Baptist. I think they were willing for me to stay. But our home church, Hillcrest, where we had been members for so many years since our son was born, since Trevor was born, they were acquiring another location. They were having a second church location over in the Spanish Trail area, Spanish Trail and Summit Boulevard. So I had known the guy who was going to be the campus pastor there. He called me. We met for coffee, and he said, why don't you come on and do ministry here? And we'll do family ministry together. And then just, yes, I mean, absolutely, yes, I will do whatever, whenever. And again, just love being a part of every bit of that process of seeing ministry and knowing what it is and just doing it and just diving into it. So again, that's a condensed version, but there's a lot to that. But again, I want to point out the fingerprints of God in that moment, because I'm real big. One of my themes, thing I always try to do is to build monuments. God tells us all the way through Scripture, build monuments, mainly Old Testament, when he tells Joshua, you guys just cross the Jordan, put rocks here. So that when people come and say, what are those rocks? You say, God led us through this river. God dried up this river. We walked across and on dry ground, and here we are. So that when you struggle, you go back and look at these moments. And again, I could go on with these examples, but I'm big about the monuments. That's a monument in my life that I see God moving when I had no idea what was happening. Yeah. All I can say, I felt the pull, I felt the tug, I felt the call of God to do a thing, and he opened doors for me. And it's not the only time he's done that. But that was my intro into ministry, just finding out what that looked like and being a part of the church.
Something that I've just kind of observed over the years in my own life, but I've seen it in others, and something that I take great delight in, is the Lord uses people who are seemingly ill-equipped for what he's called them to do. And he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called, which is something we hear and say often. But I love when God places people that are not really of the same ilk of who he's played, and I know that I find myself to be probably a bit cavalier in most of the environments that God has placed me in. And you're also that way. I totally forgot about this whole season of you being at First Baptist. And I remember getting to lead worship for a I believe it was a fundraiser for
Yeah.
Haiti.
Yeah.
I think, and it really didn't turn out to be anything amazing. Like, I think there was more performers than people showing up to the actual thing. But I remember just like, this very reserved congregation of people, and our band that's very modern contemporary worship, with
Mhm.
screaming electric guitars and leather jackets. And there's Jim Carmack at the back of the room jumping up and down, going hard in worship because
We
he's
worship that night. We
so
worship.
excited. And it was just funny. Like, there's, because I could see this from the stage. There's just this kind of, stoic, frozen chosen, as I call him. And there's Jim Carmack, who's just dancing unashamedly. And I was like, this is great. But I know that the Lord used you in that environment to help loosen some people. And that was
Yeah.
kind of us at Hillcrest too. Just the, coming from a very evangelical, charismatic background, where
Mhm.
people are like, who's this guy that jumps up and down on stage? I'm not sure about him. But the fact that we're used in those moments. So I think God kind of takes delight in the, there's going to be apple, 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 and you're a grapefruit. And this one is just like, but I need you to be the grapefruit here to kind of
Yeah.
shake up what the apples are doing. And that's okay.
And the apples are valuable. The apples are valuable. The
Very
apples
much
have,
so.
have a calling and have done a thing. Like, I never want to go in to change a system or a thing, but I wanted to be myself. And if I'm going to go in, I'm going to worship unashamedly, because I am so grateful. Like, I it's one of those where you talk about, do you wish you had done things differently? Maybe. I maybe wish I preached my first sermon as a senior in high school at our church in Northeast Ohio, because the Easter sunrise service, our high school group did it. So I preached my first sermon there, and I feel like God was kind of saying, this will be a thing I've got for you, if you're willing to follow. And I was like, no way, I don't want that. Like, it was my own fault. Like,
yeah,
but I just wasn't ready. So do I wish I'd done it? Yeah, maybe. I maybe wish I had been preaching for all these years. But at the same time, I now have these stories, and I now look back, and I'm so grateful that God did not forsake me, that he did not leave me to my own, that he did not just let me go, but he kept on pursuing me in his subtle time, almost timeless, because it took so long, but in his way to get me where I needed to be. And I'm not there. Again, I know there's more in the future of whatever he's got, but to have that story, to share that and say, look at what God has done to me. How could I not worship that way? Because that's genuine from the heart. I'm not putting on a show. I'm giving praise to the Creator and the God who loves me and has redeemed me. So it's like, how can I not? And again, people worship in their own ways. And I was that guy that sat in the back. I was that guy that kept his arms crossed most of the time. I was that guy that fell asleep in sermons because I was so tired. I was that guy for a long time. I was that guy that didn't want to get to know anybody. So I'm not like saying I jumped into church and joined everything and was like, I'm here. Yeah. It took me a long time to grow. So I always try to give people grace when they show up at church and they do that, or they act that way, or they say those things, because I was that guy. I was that person who didn't want to get involved and didn't want to be bothered. And so it took God time to grow me and to become to that point. And so that's how I am now.
And I think it's really easy for us to get hard on ourselves. Like you're saying, did I wish I would have done it this way? The coulda, shoulda, wouldas. But we know that God uses all of the stories and experience to make the now, I think, much more colorful. And I always say, like, when people go through things, it's not taking away from what could have been. I think it gives you more credibility when you are speaking into others who are going through a similar situation or the same situation, that you can say, I was there. I understand. Yeah. I might not be feeling the exact same way that you are, but let me be able to speak, because without those experience, I really don't have any, like I said, credibility to kind of speak into what you're going through. Like we need to be able to have this, so that way I have a place at the table. Sure. Would I have wanted a more direct, easy route and been like, yeah, but I'm kind of thrilled that it's a little bit more of a patchwork, that I can say this makes me selfishly more interesting, but truly to go, I have more to pull from to speak into more people than I would had if I just followed one straight path.
Yeah, agreed. And that's the thing. It's a dangerous game to play that what if, because that's not how God works. And I don't fault him, because I don't think this was his plan, if that makes sense, but it's his plan. If I could say that very confusingly, because I knew this is where I needed to go to get to where I am now, and still yet to go. And so there are other plans. I think he would have blessed me pursuing, trying to be a pastor at a younger age. I think that would have been a blessing, but I would not be where I am with the people I'm with, doing the things I'm doing.
Right.
And so it's just, like you said, you just be careful with those things. Your story is your story, and it may not always be the way you want it to be at the time you want it to be in, but you just keep on going. You just keep on going, being faithful.
Yeah. Just keep moving forward. So you find yourself here on staff. You're a part of this, not necessarily Wild West team, but just this punk rock Christian church thing that was great. That is, David Wiggins, Jordan Christie, friend of the show, and Jim Carmack. And gosh, I was on staff at the time and was over at the main campus, huge in those, but there was a point when I kind of shifted and I was over more at your campus. And I was like, this is it. Like, this part of town, I love this group of people. I love, everything was just smaller. It felt so much more intimate. And I was like, I jive with this. Like, this is just so great. And I'm so thankful for that season. And then I kind of watched in a very strange, I'm sure systematically in his eyes, but not to mine, I watched as God started kind of pulling from this place. It was almost like this, little incubator for the next, and you're like, why are you taking this away? It's so good, but we watched as David went off with his family onto the mission field, and we're like, crap, I don't want David to go. David's like this, wild man and throwing chairs and whatever, just all the craziness with a voice like an angel. And then, I watched this moment where my friend Jim Carmack goes, I think we're going to go onto the mission field. And I want you to talk about that. I mean, like, for me, it was really hard because I was like, my buddy was not going to be around that I could just grab coffee with once a week. But I know that this was so important. And nobody just goes, you know what? I think today I'm going to go live in a third world country where there's just bugs crawling over my house. It has to be kind of like a calling or this like glorious burden on your heart. How did that come about for you guys?
Yeah. So I was asked to go on a mission trip to Russia years before, when I was still at Channel 3, and they asked me to go to basically help video, and record some of the trip. I did, and I got back, and I was trying to tell Tracy about it. And at the time, our daughter Sydney was, I think, just turned 2, and so she's like, "Yeah, that's great. Get back to reality and get back here, parenting and doing all our real life stuff." So that mission, like, exposure happened early for me, but really didn't do anything with it after that. So fast forward several years later, and our kids are older now, and we're doing a mission theme at our church. And they used to pass out a booklet of all the mission trips we were going to take every year. And so Tracy said, "Where do you want to go?" I was like, "This is awesome. Let's go to Alaska. My good friend Brian just moved to Alaska as a missionary there." She said, "No, you're just going to go hang out with him. Like, we're not doing that. I don't want to go to Alaska." "Okay, what about London? We're like taking a trip to London to work over there." She said, "No, that's like a vacation. We're not going to do that." I said, "Well, where would you like to go?" And she said, "What about El Salvador?" I said, "That sounds like a great idea." So anyway, we had meetings. So Tracy and our son Trevor and I all went to El Salvador this first time, and actually in 2015. And wild, just broke Tracy's heart. Seeing, like you said, third world country at the time, gangs were everywhere, poverty was rampant, really difficult situations. And we worked and we served, but just kind of got that mission bug in us at the time. The following year, there was a trip I couldn't go because of some things I had going on, but Tracy and Sydney, our daughter, went. And then we're back and forth. And so we go again. And so at one point, Tracy comes back and she said, "We need to move here." And I said, "No, we don't." And she said, "Tell me why not."
What a question. And
like, I had nothing. I mean, I had superficial stuff. Well, we got a house and we have jobs and, we have cars and so I'm gonna think about that one. And so, we kind of went back and forth on that, but she never really let it go. She kind of kept bringing it back up. She's like, "I think we need to move." I said, "Let's pray about it." I kind of used the "let's pray about it" card, thinking, well, God will explain to you why we're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, that's
and we prayed.
Let's punt this.
We prayed specifically about it together and earnestly, and darn it, sooner or later, I'm coming around like, we could actually do this thing, And so we started looking at avenues to do that. Hillcrest is a Southern Baptist church, and we're part of the International Mission Board. So we started looking at that avenue, and we started looking at other potential ways to do that. But where it really got real was we were kind of back and forth. And so Tracy told me, I need you to go down and take a trip. And our missionary partners that we work with there in El Salvador and Santa Ana, his name is Kenton Moody. And so Kenton's a missionary there. She said, I need you to go. I need you to spend a week with Kenton, and you talk and you pray about it, and you come back. And if you say no, we're never going to bring it up again. And if you say yes, we're going to sell the house and move. It's like, okay, deal. And so I went, and I'm praying. I am praying hard. And so my biggest struggle in this time is, where are we going to live? Where are we going to live? Like we're considering bringing our kids. And so at the time, we not only have Trevor, who is our oldest, but then Sydney, and then we've adopted 2 daughters since then. We've adopted Shelby and Jada. And so Jada at this time is like 7, 8. So she's young. And so I'm thinking, where can we live? These are dangerous areas. These are neighborhoods I don't know. I don't really speak the language. Like, where am I going to live? Where am I going to live? This is just my burden. I'm looking at all these places. So we're driving around all week. There's apartments there. There's a house there. Nope. Like, I'm not putting my family in that place. I just know it's not right. And so I'm struggling and kind of get to the end of the week. Like, we don't have a place to live. We can't do this. I just don't feel comfortable bringing my family here. And so that last night, Kenton, the missionary, says, hey, we're going to go to a dinner. A church member invited me to go to dinner. So we go up, we drive about 15 minutes outside of town. We go up this kind of side of a mountain, basically, to this guy's house. Turns out he's a businessman. He's like an importer, exporter, and very successful in El Salvador. And so we sit through dinner. Everybody's speaking Spanish. I'm playing with the little dog who's come and made a friend in me and sitting on my lap. And so I'm kind of by myself this whole dinner doing nothing. But at the end of dinner, this gentleman, this church member, looks at me and he says, and what are you doing here? In English, fortunately. And I said, we're praying about coming and being missionaries to work with Kenton. And he said, you would bring your family here? Why would you do that? And I said, if God's calling us to do this, I have to be obedient and do that. And the next question out of his mouth, Zach, was plain as day, where would you live? And I said, I don't know. And again, I got chills. I don't know. And his next sentence was so clear. He said, well, I have houses. You can just live in one of them.
Wow.
And I just stopped. Like, you have houses? What do you mean? He said, yeah, I've got a couple extra houses. He said, I can show you one right now. And it was really up the mountain, like next to his house, in this secure place outside of the middle of town. And it had everything. That was a crazy design. It was outdoors, basically. We had some bedrooms. Everything else was out in the open. There were just no walls. But it was like this. It was this moment of God just saying, a house is not difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like the thing that you're most concerned about is nothing for the creator of the universe.
Yeah.
Almost like God saying, what's your next objection?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, and it was a process. Believe me, we wrestled, we struggled. This is not this straightforward, but it was that moment of, I've got you. If you're going to be obedient, if you're going to say yes to what I'm asking you to do, I'll take the rest. And I'll at least add unto you. And so I did. I called that night. I said, "We're not going to believe this." She said, "I totally believe it." I said, "Okay, there we are. Let's get ready and let's go." And so came home, started making plans, started looking at this, found a sending agency. Strangely enough, I knew this guy used to work with at Channel 3, and his dad was part of this mission sending agency called Globe International, which I didn't really know about. So I met with Mr. Scott Brown, and we sit down, and he answers all the things, like all my objections, like, what about this? He's like, that's easy. What about that? Nothing to it. Scott's giving me all these answers, like, why not do this? So we did. We packed up all our stuff. We sold our house. We gave away cars. We did all the things that we thought we were doing, and put all our lives into 2 suitcases each, and got on a plane and moved to El Salvador in 2018, which was wild.
Yeah.
And again, short version of that, I know, although some of you are like, no, it was really long, but that's it's God moving in the moments that you don't always expect. And I was in ministry. That was the thing. I was struggling with being in ministry. I felt like I was saying, God, you brought me to ministry. Like, this is a really good thing. And almost him asking, it is. And are you willing to give this up too for me and for my name? Yeah. And my first response was no. And then I finally said, yes, yes, I am. If you'll lead and you'll take care of us. And he did. And he did.
It's amazing what happens when you say those seemingly simple words. Here I am, Lord, send me. Because he goes,
it was that simple.
Yeah.
And people struggle with that. Like, well, what if he sends me to the remote jungles, in Brazil or in Africa? Well, if that's not the call in your heart, he's not going to send you to those places.
Right.
I don't believe God sends you to a place to be miserable for him. Now, are there struggles? Absolutely. Are there challenges and things you face? For sure. But he's not going to just take you and put you in a miserable place just because there's no one else to do it. Like he
Right.
has gifted you and called you to a thing. And when you determine that call, he will equip you and provide for you. Now, again, persecution, maybe death, like maybe sicknesses and struggles. Yeah, those are all on the table. That's not a guarantee that it's just going to be a sit back and, I'm not saying like we sat in luxury and just like he brought us cars and like just this like leisurely life. Like we just hung out in El Salvador. Like we worked and there were challenges and there were a lot of tears.
Yeah.
But he was in it. Like he was in it with us. And I have never had a stronger prayer life than in El Salvador with my family every single day. And I have never had a more trusting and Holy Spirit leading, if you will, moment, like day-to-day moments. I'm not saying the Holy Spirit's not leading now, but I'm saying like being in that presence and walking intentionally was so powerful and something that affected all of our family.
Yeah. That's wild. I mean, again, the amount of lives that you've lived thus far, and I've loved getting to just be with you on this journey of life. It's been a joy and a pleasure. So if if this was it, like if it just ended today, heaven forbid, but if it ended today, like what would you want your legacy to be?
I would want my legacy to be someone who was a mess. Someone who made wrong decisions and wrong choices and said and did things that were not honorable all the time and not kind and not the best. But God was able to use this mess. And I pray that someone would look at the entirety of the life and be able to see at the end that we said yes, that we were obedient and followed, that it's not about me as much as I wanted to be seen and recognized and selfishly have all those perks, that I was obedient to the Lord and I'm doing my best now to honor and glorify him every single day with everything I do. I still mess up. I'm still a mess. I still make mistakes and stay and do the wrong things. And we have struggles and challenges and sadnesses going on. But I pray that people would see that my life and the life of my wife, Tracy, have done our best to honor and glorify God and do what he calls us to do. That's my ask.
I love that. That's so good. Well, I love that answer. Jimmy C., you're an American treasure.
Well, and I want to say two quick things before we go. And I know it's been long. I'm sorry. But I want to tell anyone who might be listening, if God is placing some kind of calling on your heart, please pursue that, whether it's ministry or worship or missions. If you've never been on a mission trip, go on a mission trip. If you've never, whatever it is, take that next step to get closer to God. Whatever that calling, that pulling is on your heart, on your life, when you pray, when you seek, when you read the word, follow that next step to be obedient to God, whatever it looks like. I want people to do that and take that step, encourage you to get involved in missions or local ministry, whatever that looks like. Do that thing. Second thing, I just want everyone to know that Zach Brown is the friend I call when I need prayer, when I need encouragement, and Zach stops whatever he is doing, wherever he is, and stops and prays for you in the middle of a crowded mall or a room or in the car or whatever he's doing. If I need that, I call Zach, and Zach immediately responds and prays and lifts me up. Zach, you are an encourager and you are one who builds up and you are faithful to that. I'm so grateful for your presence in my life for doing those things, because when I need the prayer, and we all do, when I need that moment, you're the one I call, and I'm grateful for that you've been that way in my life.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
It's too early in the day to make me cry, but I appreciate it. People and time, I think, are the only two things that we have, that we can really have control, in our lives, that we can, once they're gone, they're gone. But when you have them, it's such a treasure, and we need to give them the respect and honor that they deserve, so it is an honor to get to, spend time. And anytime you call, if I see it, I'm like, guys, I got to step away. It's gonna be a little tricky if I'm on stage in the middle of something, but I'll figure it out. Somebody cover this piano part. Jim, thanks for coming and hanging.
This has been fun. Yeah, I'm grateful for the invite, and again, to be a part of this. I love what you're doing and how you've been doing it. So really cool to be here. Thank you for asking.
You bet. Thank you for joining us for our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you did, please tell a friend. And if you take just a moment to leave a 5-star review on your favorite streaming platform, you can also share this or any other episodes with a friend. I also want to thank our guest Jim Carmack for talking with me. It's always a great time catching up with him. If you want to partner with Jim and his family's efforts in El Salvador, you can visit globeintl.com and search for the Carmacks in the Missionaries tab. The Zach Brown Show is produced by me, Zach Brown, and Corey Jess, and it's part of the Zach Brown Network. Our album art is made by Luis Lopez. Our outro music is Nurse by Corey Jess. You can follow him on Instagram at corey.jess.productions. You can follow the show on Facebook or Instagram at The Zach Brown Show. You can help support the show by signing up to be a Patreon member. Memberships start as low as $5 a month. There's a lot of great member perks like buttons, stickers, an exclusive shirt, and sneak peeks at upcoming projects. Sign up right now at patreon.com/The Zach Brown Show. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.